Hi, welcome to Lessons in Leadership with Sussex Online Speakers. My name's Alistair Barton,
Hi, I'm Amy Jones.
and today we are going to be talking about some of the lessons that we've learned from Sussex Online Speakers in leadership, but also from Toastmasters in general. We've got 5 lessons for you, all of which will be split across our social media pages. But first, we want to clarify because there's often a confusion between what is management and what is leadership. So, Amy, what's the difference for you, do you think?
I think if I was to make it simple, for me, leadership is about inspiring and managing is about instructing people. So if I wanted to sort of cut that difference, that's how I would describe it. So it doesn't mean that a manager can't be a leader and a leader can't manage. There's definitely blurred lines, but when you're managing people, you're instructing them on what needs to be done, whether it's about different projects or tasks. Whereas a leader, you're inspiring them. So if you were only leading a team, rather than instructing them, for example, you might say, this is the goal, and I have faith that you were going to come up with the way that we're going to get to that goal, so that you're inspiring your team to come up with instructing. So often you'll see in companies that you might have like company directors who are leading the team saying, this is where we want to be. And then you might have a couple of managers who sort of work within those goals and instruct their teams on the specifics of how they're going to get there. What about you, Alistair? What's your thoughts on management versus leadership?
1,000% agree. Like they're so intrinsically linked, and I think when you're both roles, it's about like striking a balance, right? You could be
Mm.
70% manager, 30% leader, or I guess the optimum would be 50-50, kind of depending on what you need as the output. But for me, exactly what you're saying, Amy, management is the kind of practicalities, it's the tasks, it's the means, it's the how, and the leadership is more about the why, the inspiration, and gathering and inspiring people to achieve that mission, achieve that goal, or whatever it might be, and more about kind of empowering people. Whereas management might be a bit more dictative in terms of please do X, whereas leadership would be a bit more what do you think we should do? How do you think we should get there? What are your
Mm.
thoughts and ideas?
Exactly. And I think it also comes down to who you're managing and leading. So
Oh,
you
yes,
were
love
talking about
that.
the split. A good leader will know when someone's ready to be not need as much management. And that's often, if it's the right time and place, that's the time when you start looking at someone maybe for a promotion or to, diversify their role into different areas if they're ready for those next steps, if they don't need as much instructional management. And yeah, so it's about knowing your people, I guess, as a leader, and when to be more a manager and when to lead and inspire them more.
Yeah, definitely. If COVID has taught us anything, it's about being agile. And I
Mm.
think that that is so applicable to this kind of conversation. I expect, even in terms of practicalities, leading a team if they're at home, leading a team if they're at the office, it's not about maybe you can't be that 70-30 or 50-50 balance all the time. That might change depending on the environment, depending on the person. So, yeah, definitely flexibility and agility needed. Well, our first lesson topic then is lesson number 1, which is to be curious. And this is actually one of your lessons, Amy. Tell us what your thought process behind it was.
Uh, for me, this is a term that a lot of people have used over the years when either I first met them, especially in Toastmasters, where I'm the kind of person that I want to know how things work and the why behind. Someone says we have to do this, I'll say why? Why do we have to do that? And someone said to me, "Oh, you're very curious," which is good for a leader. And I thought, what do you mean? And if I was to break that down, it's sometimes when we problem solve, there's when you have a problem, there's a couple of ways you can approach a problem. So we can talk about the problem or we can talk about the solution to the problem. So when we focus on being curious, we focus on being solution focused. And it, uh, if I bring this back to a Toastmasters perspective, so we have contests in Toastmasters, and some of those just go a few levels up from our clubs up to a district level, but one of them goes right up to the international level. And in order to keep contests fair, there's a rule book. And sometimes I think people almost like make up rules, or there's what we have to do, what's if we can achieve it. and then the ideal standard. And I think sometimes people get stuck in the ideal standard and they say, oh, we have to do this. But I'm the kind of person that would question it and say, well, the rule book says we have to do A, B, and C. So yes, it's great if we can achieve this other thing, but if we're not hitting the main things, that's where, sometimes we can go a bit wrong. So by being curious, you're reading, it sounds boring, but you're reading manuals, or you're going to find information to have those answers that people, if you're a leader, people are going to come to you all the time for problem solving or for answers or to understand why things work. So if you're not curious enough to go and find answers or work with your team to find answers, then you end up just talking about problems and not talking about the solutions to them. So that's what curious is to me. What about you, Alistair? What does that spring to mind about leadership?
For me, I guess the curiosity is more on, or what resonates with me more about it is from the people side of perspective. So, like you're saying, with linking it kind of back to Toastmasters and the club, I think curiosity helps us get to know the people that we're leading better by just sort of, curiosity to me is the sort of rawest form of it, is like asking questions. So getting to know people, kind of like what you're saying, the why and the how. But I guess I'm less about the processes, more about like the individuals, because I think getting to know your club, getting to know your committee that you're leading on Toastmasters, whatever kind of leadership environment it is, I think knowing the people that you're leading better and almost what makes them tick is going to help you inspire them to meet whatever goal, mission statement you're kind of working towards. So I think it's just about purely asking questions and absorbing that, rather than being sort of someone who constantly sort of dictates or tells. It's about that two-way level of communication and asking those questions with the curiosity.
Yeah, nice. I like that. And reflecting on what you're saying, then being curious about people that you lead or work with, I would say one of the biggest lessons I've learned from Toastmasters, because I do, or we, you get involved in your club, or you might get involved in projects that involve members from other clubs, you're meeting such a diverse range of people. And particularly for myself, I work in a fairly small business, and sometimes sometimes I think there's like one or two people in our team that just think really differently to everyone else, and it can sometimes kind of feel difficult, because you feel like, why don't they get it? But in working in Toastmasters, I've begun to understand a little bit about how that person or those people might tick differently and how to get more out of them. So how do I motivate them when they might not be as mainstream or be motivated in the same way that I am? But I've learned that they're motivated by different targets and different focus. So if I ask them the right questions, or I give them different goals to focus on, then I get the best out of them. And that's definitely a lesson that I've learned through working with a lot of people in Toastmasters.
Definitely. And I think that Toastmasters also inspires introspective curiosity through evaluation and feedback and all the things that we do in relation to our speeches, getting other people's opinions on how that went. Because curiosity almost inspires openness. You have to be an open leader to receive and the feedback, to work on it, to develop yourself, so that everything's ticking along nicely. Because if you just sort of carry on with what you think is right, that might not necessarily be right for everyone else. So yeah, curiosity about how to improve, about how things are going, and that level of openness is definitely inspired by the sort of evaluations of the speeches and members that we do at club level.
If that's interesting, Alistair. Yeah, that goes straight into the next topic, doesn't it?
It does indeed, Amy. Our lesson number 2 is lifelong learning. What do you think about that? What's your initial thoughts?
I'm really passionate about lifelong learning as a subject. And when I was at school, for quite a lot of my school years, I wanted to be a teacher. And there's a university in Australia that, for their education degree, they don't call it a Bachelor of Education, they call it a Bachelor of Lifelong Learning. And it's really focused about teaching people how to learn, rather than teaching them facts and figures and maths and science. So yes, absolutely. There's as a teacher, I think what they're trying to inspire and what their methodology is about saying that in order for us to survive in a modern world where things are changing all the time and technology, is moving at a rate, like this week, I learned how to automatically generate using AI and Photoshop uh, edited images, and that's a crazy thing. So if the lifelong learning for me is really about saying, just because I've finished school, I'm not done. So, and it's, that it ties in with that being curious as a leader, because you have to be willing to find out about people, like you were talking about. You have to be willing to find out about new technologies, new ways of doing things. And you have to be really open to all the knowledge that is out there in the world to be absorbed. So, and lifelong learning looks different for everyone. So for some people, they go down a traditional route of doing PhDs and masters and certificates, or they might join an organization like Toastmasters or Rotary International, or even just, being part of a soccer club or a football club. You're learning about rules, procedures, ways of doing things, the people in your community, and the impact that different organizations have on them. So yeah, lifelong learning, I think some people would think, oh, if I'm not in an academic institution, that's not me. But actually, lifelong learning is about, even if you're just picking up a book every week and, really pushing your own knowledge in that, and a more personal, just reading a book every week, there's lots of ways to sort of push your knowledge and, build and become more wise, I would say, is the goal. What about you, Alistair? What does lifelong learning look like to you?
Well, it's so cliche, but I find myself often saying like every day's a school day, because I think, maybe even if you're not consciously out there, like you say, even if you're not consciously out there saying that you are a lifelong learner, I think everyone kind of is learning. There's a lot of kind of fake it till you make it going on, which is, just trying it and see, and that's what that kind of means to me. And I think from personally, obviously everyone has different learning styles. I'm probably more of an auditory learner, so something for me in Toastmasters that teaches me a lot is listening to other people's stories. So obviously there's the kinesthetic elements of actually being up there doing the leadership, doing the speeches, talking about your own experiences. But one of my favorite learning opportunities in Toastmasters is to hear those other people on stage that might not necessarily be in your friendship group. They might not necessarily be in, someone, that type of person employed at your company. So it's giving you so many perspectives on life, because as you say, our clubs are so diverse, people from all different cultures, walks of life. And that's one of my favorite things, because it teaches me a perspective that I don't think I could have got by any other means, or heard that kind of story by any other means without actively perhaps seeking it. So the learning and the different perspectives come naturally from the format that we take at Toastmasters at our meetings.
Exactly. And I think we get a little bit more of that being an online only club, because our members can
Definitely.
join from anywhere, so we can connect with people from all over the world. And we've got a member from Burundi, we've got a member from Saudi Arabia, we've got a member from Spain, but he's also lived in Brazil. We've had members from the Netherlands, so we get a really different flavor in our club. And I've definitely learned so much at Sussex Online Speakers about different people's culture, and the assumed, there's things that we assume that everyone has in their culture or in their country. And sometimes we'll talk about it and they don't know what we're talking about. And we go, oh, we have to explain what this is. And then on the other side, you get to learn about, what's different in their culture. What do they celebrate or focus on that's, very different from what we might focus on in, quote unquote westernized society.
Hmm. And that helps us build empathy as well, which I think is a really important skill and quality as a leader as well. But
Absolutely.
our third lesson is trust. Again, what's your kind of gut reaction on how to build trust as a leader, Amy?
There's trust is a funny one, because you when you need to get a job done, so this is maybe where like management and leadership is still overlapping here. When you have new team members, or you are maybe new to a project yourself and you're leading people, you have accountability as a leader or a manager to achieve whatever that goal might be. And that it is easy to sort of accidentally micromanage or double check on people too much and try and work out what they're doing and if they're achieving. But I think it's trust is in leadership. I think it's really important to sort of say, if we set maybe expectations with each other from the start, and sort of, it sounds really corny, but if you literally say to them, this is what we have to get done. I'm going to be accountable for this. You're now going to be accountable for that. And I'm putting my trust or my faith in you to get there. But if you need me, ask questions. So I think that's the best practice as a leader. If you can sort of really set the standard of what your expectations are, what you're going to hold them accountable for, and then let them get on and wait until you see the issues crop up. But rather than accusing them, it's about saying, I believe that, we're still working towards this goal, but I'm concerned that X happened or Y happened. So it's not about necessarily needing to micromanage people. As a leader, you still have to watch what's going on. But if you don't give people room, then they can't actually earn your trust. They can't say, look, hey, I got all these things done. And it's also about expecting that if you're transparent, then they'll be transparent. So if you said, I'm going to hit this deadline and you're not going to meet that deadline, and you say to your team, can anyone help me meet that deadline? Or I'm very sorry, I'm not going to get X done, which means someone else might not be able to get Y done. Then you're being transparent, and then they still trust you because they know that you're going to tell them if you're not quite hitting the mark. But then that is showing them, leading from the front, showing them, and then they will have that trust that, okay, if I tell my leader that I'm not going to hit something, or I haven't got something done, or maybe I missed the mark on something, it's not going to be the end of the world. And it's about having the trust in each other as individuals and as a team that will work it out in the end. So from a leadership perspective, I think if you don't start with trust and you don't talk about it, then it's very easy to get into an area where people will not necessarily lying, I wouldn't say lying, but not quite tell you what's going on because they are worried about what the reaction will be. And then when you try and have those conversations with them, they get very defensive, and that's where the trust starts getting broken down. So yeah, you need to really make it black and white from the start so that they feel inspired to hold and keep your trust by being transparent with you. What about you, Alistair? What does trust look like for you in leadership?
Well, all of that really resides with me. I think transparency is such a key word to bring out of what you said there, Amy, because it's not about lying, it's not about deceit, but transparency is a really good way to describe that. And I think that starts exactly as you've said, from leading from the front, being the example. Another kind of cliche that comes up, or that I hear a lot, is that trust has to be earned. But often people that are saying that perhaps haven't given the opportunity for that trust to be earned. If you're constantly micromanaging someone, they're never going to earn that trust because you're not giving them that space. And I think something that's really crucial about Toastmasters is that it's a really trusting space to try things out. It's got real life or real world applications, but it's not the real world. It is a sort of community organized club where we can be ourselves, we can try new things, and we can experiment a bit. And there's that almost safety net of the fellow members to fall back on, to get that supportive feedback so that you're ready to then trust in a real world environment, be that your job, friendship, whatever your kind of application is. And I think that's a huge benefit of Toastmasters.
Exactly, I agree. And I think it's also having that little bit of faith in people.
Yes.
What's that song? Have a little faith in me.
Michael song.
Yeah. But I think we talk about it in Toastmasters as having, like, integrity is a big part of trust as well, isn't it? So that's one of our values in Toastmasters. And yeah. And what's the next value in Toastmasters, Alistair?
Well, our next lesson is mutual respect, which, yeah, I think this really leads on from exactly what we were just saying. And I think for me, the core is, or what's intrinsically linked from what you were just discussing, was leading from the front. I think mutual respect starts for me by knowing that as a leader, the same kind of rules and deadlines apply to you as applies for the people that you're leading, which is just what you were illustrating, Amy. But what about you? What does mutual respect mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think, and also, I feel like what can happen sometimes when you're a leader is you try and have respect for your team, but you don't set boundaries. So then that it's easy for a team to start walking all over a leader. So a good example I would give is, when you set boundaries, so you might know that someone in your team, if we talk about a work scenario, so you might know someone in your team has, a poorly mother, and at times or on the weekends they're very focused on spending time with their mother, so you would avoid unnecessary interruptions if you're in a workplace that's a little bit more 7 days a week, when you know that they're probably in a position where they're not they're near a laptop wanting to pick up a call, uh, and or childcare for some people, you'll know they're doing school drop off at a certain time and they might flex their hours around that. So, understanding what your team's boundaries are in order for them to perform their best. That's really, I think, important as a manager and as a leader. But as a leader, you also need to sort of build mutual respect by having your own boundaries. So I know I'm very guilty of being too available for people. So responding really quickly, trying to have an answer for things on a quick turnaround. And I think people like that. So it makes it easy. It makes you an easy win for people to say, oh, I like working with Amy because she, always tries to be helpful. But sometimes when you're too helpful, you're letting those people walk all over your boundaries. So mutual respect, I think, is really important, where if you set boundaries, and it can feel hard to set boundaries when you really, a team member messaging you at 9 o'clock at night is trying to get something done. So you're like, if I don't respond, what time are they going to go to bed? What time are they going to switch off? But if you're not putting your own boundaries in place, then it starts to escalate a little bit. So for me, mutual respect is saying, if you set the boundaries and let them set boundaries, then we're making sure that everyone's rested, everyone's, given the time off that they need. But then also in the workplace or in Toastmasters, when we've built boundaries between each other, those ones that seem like you don't need to put a lot of effort into setting boundaries for your personal time, they actually play then into when you work together one-to-one. So it might be when you've got a project and someone's maybe not hitting the mark and you've got to pull them up on that, they're going to have more respect for you if you normally set boundaries with them. So if you say, right, this is, you missed this, you should have been getting that done, and you talk about why it was missed, whether they prioritize the wrong things. So it's not about accusing people, but it's about talking to them and saying, well, why did that not happen? And let's make sure it doesn't happen next time. And I think if you're harsh but fair or is the right way to go in leadership, because also people like to feel safe, right? So if you're setting boundaries and parameters for things and expectations and you hold them accountable for that, then you're reliable as well, right? Whereas if you say, oh, we have to get this done, and then they don't do it and nothing happens, there's no consequences, then people begin to mistrust you and then they don't have as much respect for you. And then that's where that mutual respect gets lost along the way. I think that was quite lengthy, but
No, I was nodding the whole way.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I think to enable respect as well, to go back to one of our previous topics, you need some openness, you need some vulnerability, you need some honesty about those barriers, and those guidelines that you want to set people for communicating with you or interrupting you. And I think that, again, Toastmasters, the applications of our meeting, for me, a big respect that is often trodden on is people's time. There's so many unnecessary phone calls, interruptions throughout the day because people are prioritizing their own time and their own need kind of versus yours. And something that is very much stuck to or trained and taught in Toastmasters meetings is the timing, not going over timing of how long you have to speak or your specific role of that point. It's something that's practiced and taught very highly, as well as respectful feedback. I, as a leader and a manager before kind of my Toastmasters journey started, the thought of giving someone in my team in work feedback or a 360 or an annual review, whatever name it might have in your business, it filled me with absolute dread, because it was like I have to tell them what they've done wrong and I have to tell them how to improve. And it's not about that. It's about that respectful evaluation and building on the lifelong learning about how you can do better. And Toastmasters teaches that really well in terms of that respectful evaluation that doesn't infringe on anyone's sort of trust or abilities. It's a very respectful evaluation about how we can improve things, and also about what they're doing well at that point as well. So that's been a skill that's really integral to the manager and the leader that I am today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reflection about how, the evaluations we give in our club meetings actually are really good lessons in respecting people, because it's also the way we deliver them, right? So we say, I believe. So it's not about saying you speak too fast. It's about saying, I felt you spoke a little bit too fast. I struggled to
Yeah.
keep up with some of the content you were sharing. If you could, take more pauses, if you could speak a little bit more slower, I would have, I feel that people would be able to fully understand you more. So it sounds very simple, but when you use that kind of language in doing evaluation, in evaluating your staff or giving feedback to your peers, if you say to them, I really like the way you did this, but I found X, or we didn't hit this goal, and I feel maybe if you tried X, Y, and Z, it would help you get there. So it's about having a conversation about achieving goals or improving performance, not telling them what they did wrong as such, and then saying you have to do better, and then they're not empowered to make any change. So yeah, having mutual respect. And do you know, funny, you were talking about the meetings at Toastmasters, and when I think about mutual respect there at work, I think managers who don't lead enough, they might say, right, we're having a meeting about X, and then it's sort of just them talking at their team. That's not, or saying, why haven't you got this done? Why haven't we got here yet? Whereas when you ask your team to help you put the agenda together, and you might start the meeting by talking about people's different wins and challenges, it brings a very different perspective to the whole team about why. I'll give a really good example. Like, if my photographer's not got everything photographed, so it's holding up the team from listing products on our website, and then we have a conversation with him, and he says, oh, my big challenge this week was I needed to redo a bunch of trade brochures because the directors were going to a networking event and we needed to get some sorted for that. And you go, oh, okay. So he had other things thrown at him, which challenged him to be able to deliver on his regular tasks. So if we, work together in a mutually respective way when we're planning meetings or talking about projects, we can fully understand the whys behind different things. And, funny little things that might come out, such as their computer's not working anymore. So they don't, their computer's not performing as well as it used to. So it's taking them minutes longer to do every task. So if you don't show that respect for your team and what they might need or what they want to talk about, there's such little pieces of information that can come out that you'll go, oh, let's buy you a new laptop, and suddenly you're much more efficient, and they will feel like you respect them because you are giving them the tools to do their job properly. And so, yeah, I think the meetings in Toastmasters has made me realize, like, keeping them to time and making sure everyone sort of gets a say is really important.
Agreed. It's all about the dependencies, isn't it? It's about how the different things link, and that's kind of more of a project management discussion and conversation. But as you know, I work in events, and there are so many dependencies in events. I can't do X until Y is done, and it's about communicating that and understanding that. And I don't think we haven't talked about the biggest respect of all as well that I would say we learn at Toastmasters, which is the respect that is listening. Some people just that is kind of one of the rawest or most basic forms of respect, is just listening to what someone has to say, not cutting in over them, just actually actively listening. And I think that leads us wonderfully into lesson number 5, which is effective communication. So maybe not necessarily about listening, Amy, but what do you think is effective communication in leadership?
Well, listening is definitely one. So I think from if we look at Toastmasters from a brand and a higher level, the perception, I think, for a lot of people is like, oh, it's about confidence and improving your public speaking. But actually, the Toastmasters slogan is not anything to do, well, it doesn't talk about speaking, it says where leaders are made. And, you know, if you look at some of the most influential people, the big names out there, the ones that really are, you know, stick in people's minds are the ones that are really good public speakers. But what we don't see behind that, so you might see someone like Michelle Obama or Barack Obama or Warren Buffett giving speeches and that are really powerful and motivational. But what you don't see behind those leaders, and is done in more intimate settings, is all effective communication as a whole picture. And, you know, like you were saying, listening or active listening. So, you know, really listening to what someone's saying, how they're saying it, and, you know, being able to give them feedback or to respond, but be patient. So listen and let them finish and then come back with a response. That's all part of, you know, a two-way communication. So if you're giving a speech to someone and then the speech is done and you walk off, then basically you're kind of just dictating at them in a way. And sometimes that's great. Like you might be talking about a really cool topic, but in the workplace or in real life, we're having flowing two-way communication with people. And that's impacted not just by what we say, but how we say it, when we say it, how long it takes us to say it, what body language we use, what types of language or grammar we use. And yeah, all of that is what we focus on in Toastmasters, isn't it? So it's not just write a speech and get up and deliver it. We want to see someone use, you know, suitable body language and facial expressions. And you know, if they're telling us something really controversial, or they're going to lean in and whisper, or they're going to surprise us by increasing their voice. So effective communication is it's a layers and layers and layers of how you can get your point across and be heard. But it's also really important to become a better listener. And I know I certainly have, through Toastmasters, really pushed myself, and still probably an area I can improve on definitely, is being a more active listener, and receiving communication, and, you know, maybe sitting on it a bit longer before I respond. So what effective communication for you, Alistair? What does that look like in your
100%. Yeah,
life?
it's the whole package, isn't it? As you're saying, it's not think when you say communication, people instantly think, oh, it's either talking or it's written, but obviously it's not. And a leadership or a leader's role is, for me, a lot of it is based on inspiring and leaving people with a message and a feeling of empowerment. Certainly, as if I think of an effective speaker who is also a leader, that's kind of what I guess stereotypically would say a goal of theirs would be. And there's so many different ways to do that, like you were saying, leaning in, doing a message, body language, etc., etc. But for me, effective communication, linking, I guess, to the respect of preferences, is to understand the people that you are leading and how they like to receive that communication. Because some people might enjoy a phone call where you're sort of saying everything that needs to be done or everything that needs to be achieved, but that might not resonate with other people. Some people, there's a lot of, obviously, things like Teams, Google Chat, all of that in the workplace has boomed because of the remote working. But I know a lot of people that really kind of hate that way of communication, and that it's not tangible for them because it's too instant, or the messages kind of disappear, that you're not kind of permanent like an email is, or like some other form of communication. So there's obviously what you prefer as a leader, but there's also what your team prefer as being led, and how they prefer to be communicated with. And that's not to say that you're sort of pandering to every individual about, you know, saying the same message 10 different ways or 10 different times. It's about making sure that you have broad appeal and a broad style that is hitting the right notes for every individual. So if you're having a meeting with your team and you're saying things vocally on camera with gesticulations, kind of like I am now, that's great. But make sure there's some minutes that are sent out afterwards via email. Little simple follow-up things like that don't take a lot of time, but are going to make that communication more effective, would be something to say for me. So making sure that everyone's sort of preference is fulfilled generally, if possible.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about evaluations before, but an effective evaluation in Toastmasters is not dissimilar to delivering a performance review, or at my workplace we call them performance planning reviews. So you prepare. So as a speaker, you prepare what you're going to say. You get up there and say it. And so as a manager or a leader in a business, you prepare the review. And I think the ultimate goal is that whatever you're going to put in that review shouldn't be an absolute shock to the person you're delivering it to, because you've probably had conversations before, and then in Toastmasters they've been evaluated before, so they kind of know what their strengths are as a speaker, where they've got opportunity to grow, where their own hang-ups are. So when they've delivered the speech and you get up and give a verbal evaluation, you've probably got about 20 notes that you've made on like specific areas, but you've only got 3 minutes to deliver it in. So you really want to focus on what's the biggest impact on the speech for you, what might be really useful for the audience to hear and pick up on. But then you deliver them a written follow-up that's got more meat in it, if you will. So that is, to me, is a really effective communication. There is about saying, well, I'm going to get up and tell you what I thought, but I'm also going to thank you.
Hi, James.
That's Alistair. Yeah, welcome to the real world, everyone, where my husband brings me in the middle of a recording. So evaluations, yeah. So that, I think, it seems so simple, but yeah, what you're saying is like actually there's communication happening in everything that we do in life, and we need to be a little bit mindful about how that's delivered. And we have structures and ways in Toastmasters for our club meetings, but even when we talk about the leadership side of Toastmasters, everyone's different. So I know you and I, Alistair, quite like email follow-up and minutes and all of that, but then there's plenty of people who like don't really read that kind of thing. And so when you go into the next meeting, they'll say, oh, what, they'll start talking about something, you'll say, no, we covered this in the last meeting. But then by having minutes, you can say, well, right, this is what we discussed. And yeah, some people need to be reminded a few more extra times. Some people will just live and die by minutes and project plans and actions. Other people never read an email, but if you call them up on the phone and ask them for something, they're always there. So yeah, you've got to try and hit everyone with a communication method in writing, but sometimes it requires a bit of follow-up. So yeah, being effective with how you communicate, it's quite complicated depending on who you're working with and who your audience is, I guess.
Yeah, I think mindful, that's a really good word. I was kind of struggling before with a word that kind of summarized, but I think, yeah, mindful, being mindful of everyone's preferences, I think is a really nice way to put it. And I guess linking to the mutual side of things as well, what we're saying about evaluation is, and I think this is something that's crucial to the success of an evaluator, is that they themselves also receive an evaluation for how well they have evaluated the specific speech. So no one is immune from that feedback. It's not just 5 people on a pedestal at the meeting, giving out the rules, giving out the feedback. And that's not the way that it should be in business either. It should be that kind of mutual ground of, this is my feedback to you. And always in my kind of one-to-ones and reviews with my team, I always say, do you have any feedback or evaluation for my leadership style, the way that we're doing things? How do you think that this is going? Do you have any feedback for me? And I think those open conversations inspire better relationships and a more transparent communication as well. And I think also, to build on what you were saying, you hit a really good note, and I always see this kind of pulled up in some of the meetings, is that the evaluation is not just for the individual that's being evaluated. It's for the benefit of the whole group. Everyone can learn. That's why the feedback is shared in a public forum. It's not just a slip that is handed to someone. It's not a private affair. It's done in front of the whole club. Again, inspiring that openness. But the reason behind that is because everyone should be able to learn from the evaluation that's been given to that individual, and again, just inspires the openness, and that lifelong learning attitude that I think we take on so
Yeah.
well.
What you were saying there about the two-way feedback, and then pointing out about how important it is in Toastmasters when we deliver an evaluation, the verbal side of it, then other people get to learn. You can actually like bring that back to the workplace, where sometimes it's really powerful if there's a behavior or something that needs to be dealt with, but it's not an escalation point yet. Like maybe it's the first time this has happened. Rather than sort of pulling the individual aside and bringing it up, if you have a team meeting often, then these sort of things can be brought up in a team meeting. And sometimes it's really powerful to call out something in a team meeting where everyone might go, yeah, like that should be happening. Or yeah, we'll be mindful of that, because then the individual, one, you're not assuming any knowledge, which is another really important thing in leadership,
Yeah.
is you're not assuming that they know they shouldn't be doing that. You're bringing it up, so you're not letting it sort of be pushed under the carpet, but it's not about calling someone out in particular. So
Yeah.
if you brought it up in a meeting with everyone, then you're like, okay, that's now everyone's aware. If it happens again, then you can have that more one-to-one conversation. But sometimes by having that conversation with a team, one, you're letting that person know, like, hey, that's not okay, but you're also avoiding anyone else repeating that behavior and making sure it's really clear, and we're not assuming things about what the expectations are around whatever that issue is, whether it's something pennies like someone's not washing up their dishes after the lunch break.
That's definitely an office
Yeah,
thing.
sometimes it's better to deliver it to the group, and that can be really effective in influencing the individual. Because I think
Yeah.
if I gave speeches at Toastmasters, say I give a speech and you just sent me a written evaluation, I don't think I would absorb it as well as
No.
I do getting the verbal evaluation first.
Yeah, agreed. And that would be doing the members a disservice as well, because everyone's witnessed that speech at the club, so they've probably got some thoughts as well. And if they are hearing, if I as a new member, perhaps sitting in the audience, think of a constructive comment and the evaluator also shares that constructive comment, that's validating for that individual without even having realized it. They might feel more comfortable going in the outside world and being able to give that constructive feedback to their team, but actually nothing's happened for them on stage, but it's just been internalized, and that has been helpful for them. And one thing that resided with me while you were chatting there, which I guess a self-reflection, I will always be the first. If I make a mistake and it is a genuine mistake, and it gets proven that I am wrong, I will be the first to hold my hands up and be like, do you know what? I was wrong.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I will hold my hands up and be accountable to that. And I think that links to our core value of integrity.
Mhm.
But I have absolutely no shame in that. I don't think there's any shame attached to that. I think, again, sharing that can be a lesson learned for everyone. Doesn't happen often, as long as I always say no deaths, no fires, no worries. I always say that to my team. And yeah, that mostly can't happen in my line of work, so we're okay. So sharing that, there's absolutely no harm, and that builds that transparency, that openness, which again, I think I've hammered this home so many times, but I think that's very crucial to leadership.
Absolutely. Well, 5 lessons. Oh, it's been a pleasure, Alistair, as always, to chat and delve into some of the things that we've learned, or maybe not learned at Toastmasters, but maybe formalized through being members of Toastmasters and Sussex Online Speakers.
Absolutely. And we hope this has been really helpful. If any of this has resided with you, post us a comment in the comments section, send us a message, or if you're intrigued, all of our websites and our next meetings will be advertised in the links on our socials.